Hello and welcome to the CSN 3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the three M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This podcast is brought to you by the OptiLife Academy, Case Specific Nutrition's very own online do-it-yourself wellness course that allows you to focus on optimizing your health and habits from anywhere with an internet connection. Be sure to check out the free trial at optilifeacademy.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. You can use code Andrew at checkout for 10% off. Today's episode, we are going to be discussing the big, feared, and very heavily misunderstood word, calories. I wanted to take a little bit of time and make sure I broke this down. And I will also note that within the OptiLife Academy course, I actually have a section that discusses this as well for reinforcement for any of you that want to have a video component that allows you to kind of watch things over and over again to really fully understand. But calories are obviously, that's a word that everyone throws around, everybody tosses around. It's on menus now. It's up on the boards at all the fast food restaurants. And I talk about it on a regular basis, really as a point of understanding. And so I get a kick out of it. I used to do a speaker session at a medical office a few years back, and I'd always start the talk with the question of who can tell me what a calorie is. And over the years, I think I had one person that actually genuinely understood. You get some people that would say, oh, it's energy, right? But, a calorie is actually a measure of heat. And so it's the amount of heat required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius in temperature. And that's obviously a super nerdy definition and probably feels extremely vague and amorphous and detached from anything we're talking about. But the reason that's important is because a calorie is a measure of heat produced. And so a way to think about that is that's the same thing as the exhaust coming out of a car. It's a measure of expense. And so what's tricky is we talk about calories as intake, right? When people talk about eating calories, right? This food has 300 calories. They're talking about consuming calories, but in reality, we don't actually consume calories. What we do is we expend them. So what happens is that if you want to think about it for a moment a little differently, calories are kind of like a fire, right? We are 98.6 degrees as our average human body temperature, and most of us keep our houses between 68 and 72 degrees. So we're in an environment that is roughly 30 degrees cooler than our natural body temperature, yet we continue to be 98.6 degrees. And that is our output, right? That is our expense. That is our heat output. And when we exercise, our body temperature goes up, and so we burn, or we expend, as a better way to say it, right, more calories because we are producing more heat, and that can be measured in calories. And so we have to then ask the question of, okay, if calories are the fire, then what's the firewood, right? So if calories are the expense, then what's the intake? And carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, but really more particularly and more often, carbohydrates and fats are the firewood that fuels the fire. So what happens is we eat food, and food really is our firewood as an overarching theme, right? We eat our food, and our food goes through our body and does a ton of different things that we don't have time to get into on this thought experiment. But one of the main things that it does is it gives us nutrients. It gives us carbohydrates and fats that our body then takes into our liver for processing, and then delivers in terms of energy to various cells. But what happens is our body converts our carbohydrates and fats into usable energy that we commonly refer to as ATP, and that is our cellular energy. That's the energy that our cells then use. And think of all of our cells as factories, right? Our heart is a factory, and its factory is a distribution system. It pumps blood. Our brain is a factory, and it is a library. Our nervous system is a factory, and it is a distribution system in terms of information, and tells us, if things are hot or cold or scary. Our liver is a processing plant that basically works through and facilitates and that kind of thing. So our body is a giant systematic group of factories, and all of those factories run on fuel. And then all of those factories expend energy. So we eat food, Those factories get the fuel they need. Those factories then have, do their jobs that are, are meant to allow us to be alive, 98.6 degrees, heart beating, brain thinking, nerves functioning. And, our muscles are a factory that allow us to move. And so when we use our muscles, the movement factory obviously uses, additional calories on top of the ton of calories our body expends in a day. But all of that, the food that we're consuming, and then the factories functioning, burning, and then output, that is what creates our body heat. And that's a really important thing to understand, because people are obsessing over calories in a way that is not useful and many times harmful. But then we also start to think about how illogical it is to have excessive caloric restriction. So when we think about, we're saying calorie restrict, well, to be honest, you're not actually calorie restricting, right? You're energy restricting. Your body still needs the fuel. And the basic concept behind weight loss is we measure how much your body burns, with all these factories going, and then plus whatever activity you're doing. And the average person, about 80% of the calories they burn is just to be alive. And then from there, we have the activity additions. And the basic concept behind the attempt at weight loss is, if you eat less energy, so if you put less fuel in the factories and the factories have less fuel to work on, they're going to tap into reserves, which would be our fat stores. And that's going to allow us to actually burn fat. And then so our caloric expense, which is our output, will be unharmed. We will still have the same caloric expense or output, and we'll just be using, the food that we're taking in as energy alongside the food that we are, or the energy that we are borrowing or using from our reserves. Where there's a flaw in this thinking is there's a big difference between the ability of our body to basically calorically suppress versus calorically, uphold. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times people over restrict, right? So I call it, they rob the bank instead of shortchange the drawer, where we can look at a person and say, just for an estimate, and by the way, calories that we calculate are an estimate, and they're not guaranteed, and there's also some variance here, which we're going to dig into. But we could say, okay, you expend 2,500 calories a day, which is to say that for your body to thrive, for all of your factories to be doing their thing, for your liver to be functioning at its best, for your skin to be, repairing itself, for your fingernails to be growing and staying strong, for your hair to be thick, for your brain to be clear, all of those things, you expend 2,500 calories a day. Well, if you then decide you're only going to consume 1,500 calories worth of energy, which is to say that you're going to eat carbohydrates and fats and protein, and that when our body burns them, they're only going to get approximately 1,500. That would be an extremely large deficit. And what ends up happening is most people think, I'm just going to lose weight faster. And while initially that might be true, your body might dip into some of its reserves so that it can make sure things progress. What really ends up happening is your body also starts to slow down, right? It starts to make you a little bit sleepy and lethargic, which is a sign that your brain is not using as much energy. It's going to set you up to get drunk faster, which means your liver is not functioning at full capacity very well. It's going to slow down the growth of your hair and your fingernails. It's going to slow down the repair of your skin. Your muscles aren't going to repair from exercise as well, which means you're going to be fatigued longer. You're at higher risk of injury. We can start to hear where your body starts to basically try and conserve energy. It's trying to reduce your expense. And a lot of people that undereat or restrict excessively, especially in the eating disorder realm, we see this a lot. They report being really cold, which is to say that their body's not producing heat, and that means their metabolism is not thriving, right? Their metabolism, which is the measure of all things, it's the measure of all the factories working and the output they're producing. If we're cold, that means our factories aren't able to do their thing. They're being put into energy conservation mode. They're being put into power save mode. And that's really not the goal of health. That is not the goal of weight loss. That is not a goal at all, right? That is a very negative and unfortunate reality. And so Whenever you hear people talk about the concept of, one, fad diets and excessive restriction being short term, that is one of the big reasons why, is our body adapts and will adapt in ways that we really don't want it to if we undereat. But more importantly, our metabolism can go down and up. Our metabolism, our body's ability to burn, is largely dependent on what we consume and the positive habits we have. And so if we can, instead of thinking about calories as something to restrict, but thinking of calories as an understanding of our body's ability to expend, we can instead think about fueling ourselves in a more intentional way. And fueling ourselves is going to be what allows our body to thrive, right? Fueling the body is what's going to allow us to see that energy output, feel warm, have good body production, have good muscle recovery, all the things that we tend to aspire to. And what's neat is we can actually see, and you've probably heard different articles talk about the idea of, if your goal is to lose weight, for example, there's definitely some criticisms to that in the world of body composition and, what the actual need is. But the thought is, if we have your metabolism thriving, if we have you feeding your body in a way that's very positive for it, that's very, supportive of all your day-to-day, that's actually going to rev up your metabolism. And in that way, your body's going to be in a healthier state and it's going to be in a healthier place. And if we're in a healthier state and in a healthier place, then that gives us a really, really good opportunity to see our body changing for the better. And so it's a really, really unique and interesting conversation to first recognize that when people talk about, calories, we aren't really understanding that well. And because we get so detached from that, we start to get detached from food. And how many of you are, familiar with the low carb and the low fat, diets and, all of that, where we can see that, what we're doing is we're basically restricting the firewood, and then we act surprised when the fire dies down. And so what we want to be thinking about instead is, how can we fuel the body well? How can we fuel the body intentionally? How can we fuel the body sustainably? And better understand what's called our bioenergetics, which is using our macronutrients to optimize your caloric expense, right? Setting it up so that your body can really thrive and allowing your positive habits to change how you feel, and those measures of physical progress and mental progress and physical success based on an awareness of fueling, not restricting. I hope this has been an interesting perspective, a different take on calories than you're used to, and maybe gives us a little bit of a start in trying to think about calories differently and fueling our body intentionally, and starting to maybe observe why a lot of those fad diets and a lot of those excessively restrictive diets don't ever last and lead to short-term success measured by the scale dipping, but oftentimes lead to long-term health issues in the form of the metabolism being suppressed, mood and energy levels becoming erratic, cravings spiking, and overall we can see that over time can lead to our body and ourselves feeling more and more out of control. So again, I hope this was an interesting thought, an interesting mindset for you. If you're interested in discussing it in greater detail, or personalizing it to yourself and trying to better understand how to fuel you, you can feel free to reach out to us here at Case Specific Nutrition. We can be contacted through our social media at Case Specific Nutrition or our website, casespecificnutrition.com. I'd like to thank you as always for listening to our channel. Please subscribe and share on your favorite social media, tagging a friend. And don't forget to hashtag Spread the Health to help us continue our campaign of trying to improve every person's individual health journey. We will be back here next week for another CSN 3M Mindset Monday.